hey, this is a new discipline. I need to learn it. I started to look at problems in a new way. I started to look at my team members in a new way. I started looking at the engagement with stakeholders in a new way. And I was equipped with tools and resources to be able to better manage these situations.
In my quest to help engineers and technical contributors become great people managers, I tend to talk with two different kinds of guests. I talk either with technical leaders who have already made the transition themselves, or I talk with leadership experts. And in today's episode of the Leadership Launchpad, I get to talk to someone who is actually both. Omar Halabieh is a global tech executive with over 20 years of experience in the industry. He is currently the Director of Technology for Amazon Payment Services based in Dubai. Within and outside of his role, Omar is passionate about helping others unleash their leadership potential and accelerate their career growth. In this conversation, we really focus on the common challenges that people face when they first become a people manager. From delegation to relationship management, building trust, we really cover it all. But before we get into that discussion, I do want to remind you that if this is your first time listening to the show, make sure you subscribe so you never miss a future episode. And if you happen to be someone who is responsible for leadership development in your organization, I would love if you could reach out to me, Matt at bettereverydaystudios.com, so we could talk about what's going on with your organization and whether we can help you build better managers. And with that, let's get into the discussion with Omar Halabieh. Omar, thank you so much for being on the Leadership Launchpad. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks a lot for having me. I'm super excited to dive in.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you here because I've been following you for a long time on LinkedIn. You are amazingly active there. I don't know how you find the time, especially with what I'm sure is a very demanding career. I'd love to kind of peel back a little bit because, as people find this show, they might look you up on LinkedIn and see just all the wealth of knowledge that you have that you're sharing on LinkedIn. But I'd like to start kind of back at the beginning of understanding a little bit more of your leadership journey. What was your first role as a people manager?
Sure. So my first role as a people manager was almost 15 years ago now. I was working in an energy company, and up to that point, I've been obviously in IC as a software engineer, working on systems related to power management and energy. And as I worked through that, a few things kind of for me were very important. Obviously, doing your job really well is almost in some sense a prerequisite to any consideration for
Yeah,
advancement. But it was also
yeah,
around both how you help others, I think was one definite component, because that also shows your ability to lead, in some sense without authority and lead with
yep.
influence. And the other thing was really noticing what are some, let's call it white spaces that exist, meaning these are responsibilities or jobs that need to get done that don't necessarily fall
Mm,
in, your core responsibilities or let's say your formal job description. So it may be like, say, for example, on a project, you're working and then some contract with a third party vendor is blocked and you going in there figuring out how can you help it move forward because you're stuck on
mm.
like integration testing that you needed to get done with that third party. So a lot of these things I think give glimpses of like your leadership potential. And so after that, doing that for a while, my manager at the time decided to move on and take up another opportunity. So when the leadership team looked at, the profile of the team, who the people were there, what they were doing, what kind of trust and respect they've built both within the team and with stakeholders, I kind of emerged as a natural candidate for that role, and I was offered that position more formally. So that was kind of my transition,
Yeah.
and I think a few things that I've learned is, again, you have to do your job really well. You have to think beyond the boundaries of your scope or your responsibilities. And you need to be like a scale multiplier in terms of adding value whenever and wherever you can and helping your team thrive.
Yeah, there's I love so many pieces of that. A memory that it sparked in me, this is something kind of from a completely different walk of life, but I'll never forget one time when I think I was in a restaurant somewhere, some random restaurant, and asking, we were asking for help from somebody who wasn't a server, but we were asking them if they could check on an order or something like that. And they made some comment of just like, "Oh no, I'm not a server yet. I'll do that stuff once they pay me to be a server." And it was just, kind of, I think that's one of the
Yeah,
things that often gets in people's minds of just like that you get the position and then you do the
yeah,
work. But there's so much that goes into it's not about like working for free
yeah,
necessarily, but like you have to show the people above you that you have that wider frame
totally.
a little bit, of being able to take on jobs, being able to take on responsibilities that aren't necessarily yours for one, but also just that you have kind of some sense of bigger picture, what's a little bit important to kind of show that you're ready to move up. Is that right? That's
Totally.
kind of what I can think
Because
of.
ultimately, whenever leaders are making a decision to say, give you a role or promote you or whatever, they're taking some level of risk, right? Because ultimately they don't know
Mm.
how things are going to pan out. So the best thing you can do is how do you minimize that perceived risk to them
Ooh.
so that they feel confident that they're making the right choice in that regards. And obviously,
Mm.
if these are things you're already doing, that's the best way, at least that I know of, that you can reduce that perceived risk.
I love that. That's such a great frame of thinking about it. Yeah, I really like that. If you remember back when you first moved up into that people manager role, do you remember kind of like what your belief was about what it meant to be a manager or what it meant to be a leader back then?
Sure. To be honest, like starting out as a manager is probably one of the toughest career transitions. And obviously, even then I've been promoted several times. That first transition I remember vividly because of just how challenging it was. Because
Mm.
you pretty much have to completely switch your mindset from that of like what contributions can I directly make to how do I enable the team. And I remember, especially during my first management role, I obviously struggled a lot. You pass through that first phase. I call it kind of the honeymoon period, where you're excited, you got a new job, you got a new title, you're getting a bump in your compensation, etc. But then things start to kind of hit. Reality starts to hit pretty quickly. So you start getting escalation emails from stakeholders about projects that are not being delivered. At times you may have, for example, people have decided to leave from your team, so you have attrition. So it really at times like gets a lot worse before it gets better in that respect. And what you try to do at the time is you try to jump in and leverage the muscles that you have, which is primarily around like
Mm.
individual, what I call like individual heroics. So
Yep.
you try to pick up the
Yep.
pieces, you try to jump in and solve some of the problems. Like, hey, if a project's running behind, you may roll up your sleeves and go start, coding after hours to get the project back on track. But what you quickly realize is you end up playing like almost like whack-a-mole, right? So you're fixing one thing, but two, three things are falling apart up until you really reach a
Yep.
breaking point to say, hey, like I cannot sustain this anymore. Clearly, you're not delivering the impact that you thought you would, and neither is it really benefiting the organization. And you start to feel like obviously some sense of burnout because you're trying to do all of that, and also a sense of like, hey, am I failing at the role, particularly given that you were like super high performer previously as an
Yep.
individual contributor. I think for me the turning
Yep.
point really when sort of I hit that rock bottom and decided, hey, I'm just going to go talk to a senior leader in the organization as a mentor and really get some advice in terms of like how do I actually go about this, and then also in
Yeah.
parallel how do I start educating myself, through reading, through listening to podcasts or any other means, to say like, hey, this is a new discipline, I need to learn it. And so how do I take all of these resources and start leveraging them? And from then, things started to click. I started to look at problems in a new way. I started to look at my team members in a new way. I started looking at the engagement with stakeholders in a new way. And I was equipped with tools and resources to be able to better manage these situations. And then things started to click slowly but surely. And then I was on that upward trajectory to where not only results were coming in, but I regained that confidence also in myself and my abilities to succeed. And then I also started to see like the reward of the role in terms of like as team members stepped up. I remember distinctly, like, for example, a team member coming to me after a project and telling me that, hey, they've been able to achieve something they never thought possible, or they never thought that they could
Yeah.
themselves achieve. That sense of satisfaction you get from that is like unparalleled. So then you continue to build on that. But it is a
Yeah.
tough journey. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it.
No, yeah. I mean, and I love how you put it of I think one of the biggest things that people need to realize when they become a people manager is that it is, as you said, it is a new
Yeah,
discipline. It's this new thing that's going to take just as much rigor as it took to develop your initial skill
yeah,
set as an individual contributor. It's a whole new, people spend years going to college and being interns and just doing projects to build up these technical
yeah,
skills, and it can be kind of daunting to just like, oh wait, there's this whole other thing over here, this whole other bag of skills. And yeah, I do think, in my experience, the thing I've seen 100% is the most common limiting factor is when new people who transition from being technically excellent into people manager roles, they keep trying to use that technically excellent muscle to
yeah,
solve all the
yeah,
problems, and just and they really say, okay, I'll do it. And yeah, the hero mode, as you put it, and it just burns people out.
yeah.
What are some other common, since you've been doing this for so long, you're now, you've moved through several layers of leadership. I'm sure you've seen many people get promoted in this way. What are some of the other common early stumbling blocks you see when people first become people managers?
Sure. I think first and foremost, I would say thinking that your job is really to have all the answers. I remember early in a lot of the
Love
meetings
it.
that I used to have as a people manager, like the team member would barely start talking about maybe a situation or a problem that they're having, and all of a sudden I'm in there, trying to solve it, fix it, whatever else that was there. I think over time, what I
Yep.
realized is obviously this made the team then hesitate to bring up anything to you. And then it was
Yeah.
also stunting their growth. So I really, at that point, realized like, great leadership is more about asking the right questions and really knowing when you should deep dive versus when is it important to step back and let others develop their judgment and their expertise in that respect. So that was for me
Yeah.
maybe one of the top ones on the list. I think second, I would say is especially true for me at the time and also for many that I've mentored, especially when you lead a team that you used to be part of, meaning you're now leading your peers. I think this concept of like seeking to be liked. So I feel like
Mm.
I catch myself, especially that I felt like I wanted to remain liked by my peers. So I would sit, for example, weeks on out with, hard feedback that I should be giving to the team member, but being worried
Yeah.
that if I deliver it, what would they think? How would it break the relationship, etc. So really, what I learned the hard way is, being kind isn't really the same thing as like being nice in that respect, and that
Yeah.
the team, is not looking necessarily for you to be their best friend, but they're looking for you to lead and provide that leadership that's trusted and respected also. So I think
Yeah.
everything there started to kind of turn around when I started to basically give that honest feedback and really seek to drive the right outcome versus, in some sense, just optimizing for what was the nice thing to say or what was, the thing you would do to be liked. And then the last part
Yeah.
I would say is delegation, and specifically not delegating enough. This was one of my
Yeah.
biggest struggles as well. Especially, I used to, even when I delegated, I used to like over literally physically over team members' desks, watching them what they were doing, giving them feedback on
Yeah.
every single point of things that they were
Been
doing,
there.
trying to make sure that things were done like exactly and perfectly as I would do them myself. And
Yeah.
again, not
Yeah.
only was I creating a massive bottleneck for the team because that meant no progress could be made unless I was there, but I was
You were there.
yeah, but I was like driving my team crazy and burning myself out also in the process. So I think definitely learned to see sort of delegation now much more of an investment and the forward capacity of the team and their growth, and also my ability to focus my energy into things that I'm only or I can contribute the most towards as well. So those are probably three things that I would say that I see both in terms of my own journey, but also a lot of folks that I mentor early on in their leadership journey.
Yeah, I mean that definitely tracks with what I hear from so many people, especially that delegation piece and that kind of switch
Yeah,
to really focusing on helping others grow. Were there any, I mean, you mentioned you did a lot of reading, you went to a senior leader to get some mentorship. Specifically on that kind of like delegation piece, were there any behaviors or tricks like what like habits that you tried to build in yourself early on to try to be a better be better at delegation?
yeah. So a couple of things I would say there. First one is make sure that the why and the context behind what it is that you're delegating is clear. If I look back
Mm,
early in my journey, I used to just push out tasks like, please go do X or please
yes.
go do Y. And then, of course, like as the team member uses their best judgment to do it in a way that they think is reasonable, they would be missing the context. For example,
Yes.
let's say we're working on a presentation, and if I don't give them the context that this presentation is, say, for example, certain level of leaders in the organization,
Yes.
the quality of what may come out or the scope or the level of detail that's involved would be way off the mark, and it would cause a lot of churn and a lot
Yeah.
of sort of back and forth in that respect. So that was one. I think the second one is basically help link it to how this will help the team member, grow and develop, because you also don't want
Yeah.
it to seem like, hey, you're just passing them work there. So as you explain to them why it's important and also how it will help them, I think it drives that higher level of ownership and engagement on the task there. I think the third and final one is really about setting expectations and setting like the check-in mechanisms ahead of time, just so that team members
Hmm.
also don't feel like you're micromanaging them or that maybe you're not giving them enough support and guidance. So that balance,
Yeah.
I feel the more you're able to set that expectation up front of what that looks like and what you expect, I think just helps make sure that you remain on the same page and helps make it a good experience for both parties.
Yeah. This is really reminded me of a conversation I actually just had yesterday. I think it was yesterday, day before yesterday, where we were talking about the importance of storytelling
Yeah,
for managers. And the conversation kind of started in the guise of like founders who are like going to seek funding and like they need to be able to tell a story, but it really quickly got back to, like for every manager, because a lot of what you just said, I think is so right. It's that it's not about just giving a task. It's telling a story in a way about what this task is for, what it relates to, why it's important to them. And storytelling can sound like a big thing, like, oh, you want me to like write a multi-page email every time I want to tell, and it's not that, but you get good at it so you know the key things to say, so that in just 2 or 3 lines you can tell a complete story about what all the context of this task is. Because I do think, yeah, you're right, you tend to forget as you move up, like the additional levels of visibility that you have that the people beneath you may not have, and it's your job to pass that on.
totally. And a lot of times it also goes both ways. And what I mean by that is also that
Mm,
as team members both get the context and understand, how this relates to them, they're also able to, potentially flag blind spots that you have in terms of something that
yes.
you haven't thought about either. So it goes both way in that respect also. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. So a lot of this discussion, a lot of the things we just talked about were really focused on, how we're empowering people, getting other people to solve the problems, getting other people to grow. Um, but I'd kind of like to take the other side of that coin too
Sure.
for a second, because you started off about how, as when you first become a people manager, you're still highly reliant on those technical skills, and you have to teach yourself, okay, how do I stop relying on my technical skills? But in a lot of companies that I work with, what I see in highly technical companies, there is that balance of you need to maintain some technical ability, kind of no matter how high you go, so that you need to stay connected to like the day-to-day work, the day-to-day problems. How have you navigated that balance as you have moved up? How technical do you need to stay as you move up the ranks of leadership?
Sure. So I would say from a technical standpoint, like the word I like to use here is like you need to be technical enough so that you have sound judgment. And that sound judgment is
Mm,
primarily for you to be able to detect when things potentially are about to go off in a maybe an incorrect, let's say, direction in that respect, or be able to ask the right questions, challenge the team in the way that they're thinking through a problem, etc. So it's not so much as to like the doing part in terms of like, hey,
yeah.
if I go in today and I try to code, of course I can do it, but like, am I going to be as efficient or effective in doing so as like somebody who's doing it day in and day out, for the
Yeah.
same number of years? Probably not. But the question is that if you become totally disconnected from having that strong technical judgment, then in a way you can't be trusted to lead the organization and make sure that
Yeah.
we're collectively driving the right outcomes. So a lot of that again starts to say in terms of like how are you able to ask the right questions? How are you able to what I call like sniff execution smells in terms of things that tell you that either, for example, a design that we may be putting together may have some flaws, or maybe technical implementation that we're driving could be headed for trouble, or there may be things that we need to look around corners. So a lot of that judgment really helps you detect some of these things, helps you be a lot more proactive, as opposed to
Yeah.
obviously then reacting when all of a sudden you have like an actual, say, production issue or something like that, in that respect. So that's the way, at least that I see that kind of manifesting itself. And there are obviously numerous ways through which you do that. One of the things that I love to do with my team is going into some of the whiteboarding sessions with the engineers. Just have the engineer kind of sit up and explain to me like, what are we doing? How are these systems working? What are we adding? What are we changing, etc. So I think these free-flowing conversations not only are great ways to build rapport, but they're also in a way helping you stay connected to that level of detail. And of course, there you have to follow your curiosity, ask questions, dig deeper, etc. But I think these sessions
Yeah.
at least are one way, and obviously there are many other ways, some more structured and formal, some a lot less formal in terms of conversations.
Yeah, I really love how you put that though. It's really understanding what the technical ability is
Yeah,
for, what you're trying to do with
yeah,
it. And so it's not that you're trying to go build things and solve those problems, but it's so that you can sniff out other problems and see where things are going wrong and kind of apply a little bit of yeah, apply that judgment to things like you
totally.
said.
And
Really effective.
understand basically in a lot of ways like trade-offs we may be making, understanding also
Hmm.
the both the potential and also the limitations of some of, say, the technologies that we're using as well, because these all have an impact on, say, the technology strategy, but also in terms of how that
Yeah.
technology performs.
Yeah, yeah, and I think obviously in a lot of industries right now we're seeing lots of shifts in that. I mean, with companies like Boeing struggling and things like that, a lot of that discussion is around, at different levels of leadership having enough competency to sniff out those
Yeah,
things and whether or not they do or don't. Yeah, interesting, interesting. Well, you've obviously spent your whole career in the tech industry, and I think the tech industry, especially right now, is known as being very growth focused, performance focused. I think on the people management side, so a lot of this discussion, some of it has been around, you're looking after your people and caring about your people. And where do you for frontline managers,
yeah,
for people who are just promoted, and obviously this is going to be different at every organization,
sure.
but where do you kind of see the primary role of managers, and how do they strike that balance between like the performance side and the people side in an organization?
Sure. I think when I think about sort of the role of the frontline manager, I'd like to think of it as, while there are many underpinnings of how you do that and how you get there, but it helps to start from the end and work backwards. And essentially, as a frontline
Hmm.
manager, what you're trying to do is what I would call like creating nonlinear impact with your team. And so if you think about that, you
Okay.
have, say, you're managing 5 people, your role as a leader is basically how do we, with 5 people, create an impact that mirrors maybe a lot more than just the sum of the individual of
Yeah.
what each person brings to the table. And so I feel
Yeah.
like this is basically done through a focus on what I would think are 3 pillars. The first one is really about setting an inspiring direction is fundamental. So this really starts by understanding where your business is headed at whatever level that you're operating at, and not just about where it is today, but really where it's trying to go,
Yeah.
so that you can anticipate and help move your team in that direction. And it's also about then how do you connect what people are working on to that vision, so that people also both feel empowered and feel like they're part of something bigger, in terms of like we're achieving these business objectives, these organizational objectives, and in return, it's helping us grow in that journey. And fundamentally, it's about making sure that whatever your team is working on is not just busy work; it's actually driving
Yeah.
meaningful impact to the
Yeah.
business. I think the second
Yeah.
one is really around shaping the environment where high performance thrives. So it's about creating let's
Mm.
say, a high performing culture. The analogy I love to use is, think of yourself as a gardener. You're really focused a lot on the conditions that help, all the folks that you
Ah.
have on the team thrive. So a lot of the things we talk about are in terms of like, building an inclusive culture, embracing like
Yeah.
diversity of perspectives and thoughts, making sure everybody's valued, making sure everybody feels like they belong. But it's also around what are the processes that you're putting in place that really help that performance to stand out. So, for example, you may say, "Hey, we're going to have a structured process through which we do some operational review," because process allow you to set and maintain a high standard.
Yeah.
And I think, speaking of standard, like I feel one of the primary jobs of the leader is really to raise the bar on the standard. And at the end of the day, like what we tolerate becomes the norm and the level. And so you have to make sure that you're holding a high bar on the team. Of course, you have to be clear on expectation, and you have to support the team to meet those expectations. But that accountability, I feel, is key. And then the last part of
Yeah.
the 3 pillars is, what we call hire and develop the best. So that, for me, it drives everything else. So you've got to make sure that you're hiring the right people, in terms of like both the skills they're bringing, the culture fitment that they have, etc. But I think it's really about how do you leverage each individual for the strength that they bring to the table? How do you create these stretch opportunities for them to help them grow? And again, I think that one of the things that, we talked about this before, is like it gives you the most satisfaction as a manager is really when you see that people have really built their potential and achieved a lot more than what they ever thought was capable. I think for me is, one of the key things there. And when you get these 3 elements
Yeah.
right, it really just creates like a flywheel of growth that is enabled, and it really makes people both excited to come to work because they feel like, hey, this is work that I'm doing that is both benefiting me and having a disproportionate impact.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more with you on that feeling that you've mentioned a couple times
Yeah,
now of when you really like empower someone, or when someone comes to you and said like, "Wow, I can't believe I never thought I would do this." It's almost like becoming a parent
yeah,
or something, where it's like you can't imagine what it, it's hard to imagine what it feels like beforehand. And I wonder if that's one of the reasons why so many why especially that first transition is so difficult, because you have no concept of like what that feeling is when someone comes to you, that you've really empowered in that way. And then once you have it, it's just like, oh, I want to do that more.
yeah, totally.
Yeah, yeah, awesome. Well, I think that's a really great way to finish. I think because it's just like this is a super. I think you're right. It's such an empower being a manager allows you to have so much positive impact on people when you do it well. This has been a really great discussion. You can tell that you spend a lot of time on this because everything you say, all of your thoughts are so clean and distilled. It's amazing. How, if people want to hear more from you, what are some of the ways that they should follow you or reach out to you?
Sure, appreciate it. The best way to connect with me is on LinkedIn. I write daily about leadership, career, and management. So I look forward to connecting with anyone who's wants to reach out or read my work there.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I highly recommend everybody check out Omar on LinkedIn. He really does, and he's putting together some really you got some great videos that you're putting out
Appreciate
and everything.
it.
I can tell you're really putting a lot of effort into it. So, thank you so much. Thank you everybody for listening today, and I'll talk to you again soon, Omar. Bye.
Take care.